And I'm going to welcome everybody to this webinar today on artistic approaches to a just recovery. So welcome everybody. My name is Hilary Inwood. I'm a faculty member at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself because not only am I facilitating today, but I'm also presenting. Usually I'm facilitating for other people, so it's a pleasure to be sharing something about my own research program with you today. And I'm really pleased to have you all in the room. I'm going to be introducing my co-presenter, Ashley Sikorsky, in just 1 minute. Could you please, as you come into the room today, complete the entry poll just to tell us a little bit about who's in the room with us? We love knowing about who's in these webinars. That's really wonderful. And just a reminder to keep your microphones on mute, please, so that we can ensure that we can hear both Ashley and myself as we present today. Now, with that in mind, this is part of the series of webinars that we've been creating that involves the TDSB EcoSchools program. So I'd like to introduce you to my colleagues Jen Vetter and Chris Metropolis from the EcoSchools program. We love working with the EcoSchools team, and we feel this is a really special partnership with OISE at the University of Toronto. On the OISE side, I'd like to introduce you to Elise Kennedy, who is one of our key members of our team on our side. Lauren Azaparty, who's been one of our wonderful coordinators for events as well this year, and Ashley Sikorsky, who's a CTL student I'm going to introduce in just 1 sec. So with that in mind, this is what you can expect over the next hour. We're going to do a little bit of a welcome, and we will introduce ourselves fully. But we're going to do a land acknowledgement, and we'll of course do that as an artistic land acknowledgement today. We've been doing that pretty routinely. We're going to be talking about notions of injustice and connected to the pandemic. That makes perfect sense because of course conversations around a just recovery have been coming out of the pandemic. We're going to talk a little bit about art and creative activism. And then finally, we're going to introduce you to the Eco Art installation at OISE with hopes that you will all participate in it this year. We would love your contributions towards our next annual environmental art installation. And so it would be great to have you involved. And Ashley is going to take you through that in some detail. Now, with that in mind, we will start with our land acknowledgement. And I'd like to introduce you today to the work of Ruth Cuthan. Ruth is originally born in Saskatchewan. She's of Plains Cree, Scottish, and Irish ancestry, and she grew up near the Blood Reserve. She's had an early fascination with disease, First Nations living conditions, and settler-native relationships, informed by her childhood experiences, which have become key elements in her creative practice. She now works in printmaking and painting, drawing, photography, and beadwork. Adopting the traditional craft of beading in her recent work is a way to continue to center Aboriginal women in her art. And she also addresses other issues of concern, including challenging mainstream perspectives on colonialism, the relationships between settlers and First Nations people, and the frictions between those cultures. And certainly what she aims to do is expose some of the inequities that have plagued Indigenous people for centuries with Canada's relationship with First Nations people. With that in mind, this is a really interesting piece that she has created. It's a part of a series, the Trading series, which all focus, believe it or not, on viruses. So I thought this was a great introduction. This particular beaded work, it's quite small, but it's really quite beautiful and quite detailed. And it looks at the smallpox virus, which of course we know has had a really detrimental effect on First Nations people in Canada in our history, and was part of the ongoing genocide of First Nations people that some would argue is sadly still in play in some ways. Now, we do acknowledge, though, that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and that comes from the land acknowledgement of the TDSB. Now, we're going to start today thinking a little bit about pandemic injustice in the GTA. If you take a look at this map, this is from the City of Toronto map series. They've got a really great series of maps I can highly recommend for classroom use. This tracks the types and frequency of COVID cases. The darker the color of blue in a neighborhood, the higher the rate of COVID cases. So could you please in the chat pop in a few ideas around some of the injustices associated with the COVID-19 pandemic in the GTA. What are you aware of? And at this point, I am going to introduce you to my co-presenter, Ashley Sikorsky. Ashley is a graduate student who's working with me. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Hilary. So, as Hilary said, my name is Ashley. I am an OISE grad, but now I am back this year doing my MA in CTL, but more specifically LLE. And I've been working with Hilary for the past, well, this past school year as a GA. And I guess what I might do, Hilary, do you want me to read out some of these?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we've got lots of answers here. So I'm seeing job loss, no paid sick leave, less testing in certain neighborhoods that need it. Again, the lack of paid sick days, caregiver strain. To work from home is a privilege. People have to go to work even if they're not feeling well. I think that was in combination with lack of sick leave. Higher proportion amongst essential workers and service providers. Cases are racialized. Lack of medical resources.
Wow, can you believe the number of, I don't know if we've ever had so many responses in a chat room ever in response to a question. We've got tons and tons of injustices that have been identified. Thank you so much to those of you who are in the room with us today. There is no doubt that there are lots of forms of injustice that are associated with the pandemic, and you've named some of those. If you take a look at the comparison of the first map that we looked at and think about it in comparison to the second map, which is on the screen now, of low-income neighborhoods, you'll see that there is a relationship, and many of you have pointed that out in the chat, that the relationship between the frequency of COVID in neighborhoods has everything to do with socioeconomic standing. But we can extend this even further. And I thank my friend and colleague Pam Miller for introducing me to these maps earlier in the year. Jen Vetter and Pam put together a wonderful workshop, actually with Chris as well, that introduced notions of a just recovery and its connections to environmental learning. These were two of the maps that they pulled at that time, and I think they're really telling ones, that there are relationships not only between the neighborhoods that are worst hit by the pandemic, but also those that suffer, for example, a greater level of air pollution. So the map you're looking at on the left is the concentration, and no big surprise, the areas in red have a higher percentage or concentration of ultrafine particles, which talk a little bit about air pollution. No big surprise, maybe aligned at the intersection between the two major highways in Toronto, the 401 and the Highway 400, but also around the airport in this case. And that absolutely aligns with the neighborhoods in the northwest corner of the city that have been hardest hit by COVID. But there's also a relationship with green spaces here too. And on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is the lack of green spaces in that same quadrant of the city. So there's no doubt that the types of environmental injustices and climate injustices that are happening also relate to the pandemic. Now, there are lots and lots of different types of effects that we can talk about here, climate impacts of the pandemic. There are many, many negative effects. And I think even from the messages that you've popped into the chat so far, we can talk about having far more negative impacts than there are positive impacts. This is going to be, I'm sure, a point of some study for the next couple of decades moving forward. But we're seeing all sorts of negative impacts, including an increase of medical and plastic waste, a reduced amount of recycling that's happening. I hear in some communities they're not recycling at all anymore. They're just throwing everything into landfill because of concerns around contamination. We know that we've got a decrease in the use of public transportation. That's quite significant, and that's leading to a bit of a financial crisis in the GTA. Decrease in health and well-being. You've identified so many of these in the chat room already. There are some positive impacts. We know that there's a decrease in carbon emissions from cars and planes and other fossil fuel consumption. We've got reduced noise pollution in some neighborhoods because of a decrease in industrial activity. There is improved air quality. We had one of the best summers in terms of air quality in the GTA last summer. And we know that there's been an increase in people walking and biking, decrease in public transportation, increase in walking and biking because nobody wants to, if they can avoid it, go on transit these days. And we know that one of the positive impacts has been an increased attention brought to racism, discrimination, oppression, and marginalization in our community as well. So, we could spend the entire time today just talking about weighing the benefits and the negatives, but I think we're probably all in agreement that there's far more negative impacts of the pandemic than there are positive ones. So all of these conversations about a return to normal that were part of our dialogue in social media, in the news early on, really didn't unpack this notion about a return to what normal means. This is a work of art by Ricardo Levins Morales. I'm going to read it out to you just because it's a little tricky to read the text. It says that environmental justice is our cry of defiance against the onslaught of oppressive toxins and toxic oppressions that threaten to submerge our homes. This is true not just in other parts of the world, but this is true with rising sea levels, rising lake levels for all communities. And as a community that sits on the Great Lakes, we've seen the impacts of this just even on Toronto Islands in recent years, and their rising lake levels around the islands. But we know that we really don't want to return to normal, and I put normal in air quotes because the significant amount of pollution, the huge emphasis on resource extraction, of the exploitation of peoples, of animals and the land, the lack of an equitable approach to healthcare, the rampant food insecurity and injustice around the world. The list is long, right, when it comes to returning to normal. And I don't think any of us really truly want to return to this type of normal moving forward. So it does beg the question then, well, so what is a just recovery? What does that mean, and how can we unpack that? How can we use art as the next step in order to move to a just recovery? So I'm drawing on this quote from Bunyan Bryant, who's a professor at the University of Michigan, who has said, "We desire a future when people can realize their highest potential, where both cultural and biological diversity are respected and highly revered, and where distributed justice prevails." And this is a piece from the 350.org website. They've been doing a lot of work with art making, I'm pleased to say, and using it as a way to get messaging out around a just recovery. This is from Woo Kim Young. Care, work is climate work. I love that line. Fight for these jobs to be well-paid, unionized, with full benefits and respect. So again, it addresses some of these different aspects of what a just recovery could entail. And I'm so pleased to see so many artists hopping on this bandwagon to raise awareness around a just recovery, but then actually to find solutions to work towards a just recovery too. So I'm going to share some of those with you moving forward. Now, I should say that the UN has been working towards a just recovery even before the pandemic hit. Starting in 2016, in January 2016, they released the Sustainable Development Goals. And the United Nations have been working towards messaging around the Sustainable Development Goals and also tracking how these are being realized in communities around the world. They've got 17 different goals. They've identified that when we talk about moving towards a more sustainable future, that there is more that we need to focus on than simply climate action, that there's a whole raft of intertwined and intersecting elements of what a truly sustainable world looks like. So then that means that we've got to work towards the alleviation of poverty and hunger. We've got to work towards better health and well-being for all people around the world, not just those in Western nations. We've got to work towards decent work and economic growth that is fair and equitable for all. And part of that, of course, is about reducing inequalities and building towards more sustainable cities and communities. And I'm really happy that the largest school board in our city, the TDSB, has been building towards a really important contribution of K-12 education, contributing towards sustainable cities and communities. And they've been at it for a long time. So there's lots to be proud of in the work that they've been doing. And the work that we've been doing with them over the last few years to contribute to that. Certainly at OISE, we've been heavily focused on providing quality education and improving quality education, and have been since the time that OISE was founded in the late 60s. But we know that we've got strong focuses in other ways as well that relate to these SDGs. So we're going to have you keep the SDGs in mind, not just for the meaning, which is very important, but also for the graphics. And Ashley's going to talk about that a little bit later in our webinar. Now, I will say that lots of artists have been starting to think through and image to help communicate the principles of a just recovery. So this is the work of Karina Keeling. And I'm going to actually read these 6 principles out to you because the images are beautiful that she's created in this graphic, but the text is a little hard to read. So I'm going to read from left to right, starting in the top left corner. This first principle is to put people, health, and well-being first with no exceptions. The second one to the right is about strengthening the social safety net and providing relief directly to people. The third one is about prioritizing the needs of workers and communities. And then looking to the bottom left-hand corner, this one says that we should be thinking about building resilience to prevent future crises. Now, that's certainly true in this pandemic. The middle on the bottom talks about building solidarity and equity across communities, generations, and borders. And the last one on the right is about upholding Indigenous rights and working in partnership with Indigenous peoples. And so these are 6 wonderful principles. There may be others that you would put forward as well, but I think this is a good start. And certainly Karina's work has gotten wide play in social media and across the net. And it comes in conjunction with a great website, if you're interested in looking it up, which is about just recovery for all. Now, I would remind you, if you have comments or questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat and stop us at any point during the presentation. We would love to hear your comments, especially if you have more principles to add for a just recovery. Please feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll introduce them to everybody in the webinar. Now, there's no doubt that the arts have been used as a form of creative activism for quite a while. We can track this back to the 60s in part, but we've been seeing more recent manifestations of it appearing. This is just one example as part of the global climate strikes last fall. This is a work of Extinction Rebellion, which are a group that uses performance, visual arts, music, mass media to really drive the point home around the importance of linking climate justice to racial justice and to, I would argue, to economic justice has got to be part of that as well. We can't do social justice work, we can't do climate justice work unless we intertwine the two together. And so that's a really important part of what we are going to be talking about today. There are lots of artists who have been working graphically to get this message across, which is really wonderful. We've got the work of Mona Caron on the left and John Cortez on the right. I'm going to show you a detail of Mona's work in just one second, but you can see some of the qualities that artists are drawing on to start to get the message out, even in 2-dimensional ways, about a just recovery. Often seeing bright colors, really clear communication and the use of imagery, really beautiful graphics. And I love that artists are turning their attention to this work. We know that it's not enough to only use written or verbal language to get the message out about a just recovery, that we need to use all forms of human communication in order to truly introduce these concepts and get people to start thinking about them really deeply. So Mona's piece on the left is beautifully designed, taking the idea of a tree as part of just recovery. And so I'm just going to show you a detail of the top. This is as clear as I can get it. So again, I'm going to read out some of the language that she's put in the tree. So she's talked here, some of the messaging on the leaves is around healthcare for all, rebuilding public infrastructure, green jobs, universal basic income, clean water for all, clean energy, a living wage, housing for all, regenerative farming, equal access and opportunity, and prioritizing neglected communities. So with this in mind, if you could add another leaf to the tree of Mona's design, what would your leaf say? Can you pop some suggestions into the chat? What would be part of a just recovery that you would like to add into the conversation here? From Justin, overcome capital. I'm looking at Asima's comments from earlier. Asima, I'm guessing that you would like a more equitable approach to COVID testing in all communities, which would be part of that. Linda's added reconciliation and full acknowledgement of Indigenous rights, and I'll add sovereignty to that one as well, Linda. Thank you. Biz, I love that. Biz has added the notion of kindness, that we need to really think about how we can bring kindness into our interactions with each other. Joey has added investment for social impact. And Marina has talked about prioritization of education and safe schools. And so you're absolutely right, Marina, talking about education for all is an important part of just recovery too. Lori's added equity for people with disabilities. Joey's added innovation and green technology. And from Catherine, implementing a circular economy. Those are all fantastic additions. Thank you so much. Keep those in mind. I think as we head into Ashley's part of the presentation, you're going to probably want to access the chat again and talk a little bit about those. Oh, and thank you, Sungi, talking about better access to mental health supports. Fantastic. Yep. Adding, Asima says, justice and environmental education to our curriculum. And Lisa's pointed out paid sick days, excuse me, which is a really important component of what we've been hearing from doctors, healthcare professionals as a really important part of addressing the pandemic. And Marina says recognition of multiple forms of knowledge, and that's a really important part of this as well. Thank you for all of those. Now, there are lots of other artists that we can share. We had a hard time, actually, we had more artists than we could fit in today to the presentation. I wanted to introduce you to the work of Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch, who the work on the left belongs to. The Water is Life and Protect the Sacred. Christy and Isaac are in both First Nations artists. They have their own collective, the Onaman Collective, that they run, and they have lots of these banners that they have very generously put up on their website, which is why I've shown you the link down below. And by the way, all of these links will be sent to you as part of a resource handout at the end of, in a couple of days when we've got the recording to share with you, and we'll also send out the resources to you at that point in time as well. And Christy and Isaac are near and dear to our heart because they're going to be keynote speakers at our upcoming Environmental Ed Conference that we're running in partnership with Eco Schools Canada and with the TDSB Eco Schools program that's coming up in April. And they give just a fantastic keynote. So I'd love you to make note. I'm going to give you another promo on that conference towards the end of our time together today. And I want you to take a look at how they've used black and white and just a little tiny bit of color here really effectively to increase the impact of their message that they're getting out. They have got lots of different messages, and you're allowed to download these images for use in your own slide decks. They very generously made those available to anybody who'd like on their website. Amanda Costa's work is on the right-hand side. This also comes from 350.org, but in Africa. And I love this image. It's using a Mandela type image, a circular image. We've been very inspired by this. It's got the Black Lives Matter fist in the center, which came from the Black Panthers originally back in the 60s. That's become very popular again in recent times. And it's got all sorts of really beautiful detailed images that have become part of this mandala that talk about the different elements of a just recovery as well. So keeping these graphics in mind, I also want you to think a little bit about how artists can actually contribute in physical ways to a just recovery. And I love these pieces. Christophe Wadziko's work on the left is one that actually goes back to the 80s. This is not a recent thing. Christophe was one of the first artists really in the 80s to start, oh, I'm sorry, there's an extra 8 there, I should say 1988 to 89, that started to investigate the notions of using art as a form of social activism. So he is a visual artist. He's also was really one of the first to use large scale projections onto buildings as a way to get messages across. That's a common practice now, but he was really the first to originate it in the late 80s and early 90s. And this is a really interesting work he made on the left. This is what he called a homeless vehicle. And it was a way for him to address some of the concerns of homeless people in New York City, where is one of the locations he's worked around the world. This cart allowed for secure storage of homeless people's belongings in the bottom because it was a lockable cage. It also allowed those who would prefer to be, probably not prefer, those who had to support themselves by picking up empty bottles and cans to take back for the deposits, to cart those in the bottom if they preferred as well. But the top part, and this was his prototype, actually slides out. The base of it slides out and it becomes a tent that homeless people could sleep in. Now, this does not address the underlying causes of homelessness, no doubt, but it does start to get people thinking about the possibilities about how we can get people off the streets and out of the weather. And we know that in Canada, this is a particular concern, especially in the cold temperatures we've been experiencing this winter as part of this polar vortex that we seem to be stuck in. Now, there was huge limitations to this. It was really about starting a conversation rather than solving long-term any kind of problems with homelessness. We know, 30 years later, that these problems still exist. Here in Toronto, we've had huge tent cities that have been popping up across our city in parks and other areas because homeless people do not want to be in shelters in a collective setting right now because of their fears of catching COVID-19. So a number of artists are continuing to work on this. This is another design done more recently by Geoffrey de Renal, a French artist who has actually constructed this piece. It's very light for transportation. It comes apart very easily and it's warm inside and it's non-flammable on the inside as well. And this has been one of our challenges in tents in tent cities here in the GTA. This winter is a lot of these tents, when people bring heaters into them or smoke inside them, often will easily catch on fire. So this is his problem. Again, does not address underlying concerns with homelessness, but tries to at least deal with the short-term challenges faced by people who are without a permanent place to live. No doubt as part of a just recovery, we need to be addressing, right, the underlying causes. And so, artists are starting to raise these concerns, propose these solutions as a way to, in this case, deal with SDG 10 around reducing inequality and hopefully moving towards more sustainable cities, knowing full well that these are stopgap measures. I want to introduce you to one other artist, though, too. This is the work of Jason de Cairo's Taylor. His work has been around for about a decade or so. He's doing some really interesting things that would address not only notions of climate action that relates to SDG 13, but also to SDG 14, which is life below water. Jason's very familiar with the challenges that are faced by reef systems in marine environments, and the damage that's being inflicted on coral reefs, not only by bleaching because of climate change, but also because of the damage that's being done as scuba tourism becomes more and more popular around the world. Often scuba divers will pick up parts of the coral or other sea creatures when they dive, and we know that this has had an enormous impact on the health of reef systems. So what Jason has done is devised a special type of concrete that's pH neutral. He forms it into sculptures that are then placed underwater. He's done this in different locations around the world. The one on the left was actually just off the coast of Mexico near Cancun. And what happens with these sculptures is pretty neat. Not only does it take scuba divers away from the fragile reef systems that they really shouldn't be diving around, so that there's no damage caused by their diving, but it also starts to regrow coral reefs, which is really interesting on the sculptures. So the one on the right-hand side is actually, you're looking at a picture on the left of the installation just after it happened. And you can see that there's not a lot of, there's some fish floating around, but no major coral that's growing on it. But he's gone back since and taken photographs of some of the coral life and marine life that's now growing on these installations. And that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. This is actually one of the sculptures from the installation on the left. Yeah, Joey, I agree. It is absolutely amazing. And it's really, his sculptures have now spilling above water as well, which is really cool. So this is a really interesting way for his sculptures to really contribute towards a just recovery when it comes to life below water. So that just gives you a little tiny taste of what artists are working on in terms of their contributions towards a just recovery. We have got examples of artists working in environmental ways, in ways to help address economic disparities, housing, all sorts of aspects. It's become very popular to use art as a form of social activism, but also as a way to actually create sustainable solutions for all forms of life on the planet. If you have any other examples of artists' work that you want to share, I'm going to encourage you to pop them in the chat. We will save those and we'll share them as part of the resource package. So if you have a link to go with your artist name of an artist that you want to highlight, please go ahead and do that as you pop them into the chat for us. Now, we have been, in very small ways, attempting to do something similar at OISE over the last decade or so. We started creating works of art to go into our stairwell. Now, if you've been in the main stairwell at OISE, some of you I think have, it hasn't been, at least in the past, a very pleasant place. Our elevator bank, which services our 12-story building, is often overcrowded and overpacked. It's not currently, I can tell you that, because we're not in the building right now. We can't use our building right now because of the access to our classrooms through elevators. So we had realized this problem a number of years ago and wanted to direct people towards using the stairs if they were able. And the stairs have become this site now for a walking art gallery. And the purpose behind the walking art gallery is twofold. One is to get people walking the stairs from a perspective of health and well-being. We all know sitting in classes for hours and hours all day long is not good for our bodies. So walking the stairs in between classes, on your lunch break, or when you leave the building, it's all good for getting the blood circulating, and not only in your body, but also to your brain as well. And that's good for learning. But the second piece was an energy conservation piece. We felt if we could get people into the stairwells and walking the stairs, that we could also perhaps cut down on elevator use. And it's our supposition that certainly the elevator bank is one of the biggest energy hogs in our building. So we started creating artworks for the stairwells. And this was used as a way not just to get people in the stairwells, but also to raise attention to environmental issues. And I know that many of you have contributed to these environmental artworks over time. It's been a great way to introduce the OISE community to a whole wide range of environmental issues. I'll give you one example on the right-hand side. This was a way to raise awareness about FLAP. And FLAP is the Fatal Light Awareness Program that has been operating in a number of cities around the world. We have a very active chapter here in Toronto. Not only do they rescue migratory birds that have been injured, hitting tall buildings in the downtown core, but they raise awareness about the challenges of leaving lights on in tall buildings. Birds assume that they're a fly-through, and they smack into the glass. And if they're not killed on impact, they are killed by the fall they have after they've hit the glass, and they're too stunned to fly afterwards. And we know birds around the world have been dying in the millions. So this is one way to raise awareness around FLAP. We had students create watercolors, we scanned them, and we put them up in this installation. The upper left one was called Turning Over a New Leaf, and we wanted our teacher candidates to start thinking a little bit more about what practices of sustainability they could bring into their classrooms. And the lower left one was about our memories of nature-based learning and how important those are for so many of us in terms of our pivotal memories around education. Got a couple more for you. The one on the left examined the impact that we're having on bees and ways that we can help to improve bee health. It was called Be the Change. Bee spelled with two E's, no big surprise. The lower left and the upper right, and on our lower right as well, these are works made by students. We've done a couple of partnership installations with students at our lab school, the Jackman Institute for Child Study. And the students have been really eloquent in terms of raising awareness around the environmental rights for children, environmental rights for children. That's the lower right and the upper right piece that you're looking at. And on the left, this was about raising awareness around Indigenous ways of knowing, in particular the cardinal directions. This is just part of that installation. And the center one, like the bee piece, raised awareness around the plight that butterflies are suffering right now in terms of loss of habitat, and pesticides, and how important it is to raise awareness around all sorts of pollinator insect species in the environments in which we live. I will say that Elise and I worked on a couple of years of a research study to track the impacts. We just finished it actually, track the impacts of involvement in making these environmental art installations. And we were really surprised to discover that not only did involvement in creating an environmental art installation help improve people's attitudinal change towards sustainability, it raised their awareness, and for many of them became sort of a point of a deeper dive into learning about whatever issue we were addressing that year that they were working on the installation. But we were really thrilled to see that for many people who have been involved in these installations, it also has resulted in some behavioral change as well. And that's been one of our biggest challenges when it comes to environmental education, is moving people from understanding that we need to do change, but actually implementing it in our lives as well. So this has been a really interesting outcome of the research we've done on these environmental art projects over time. And thank you, Laura's just popped a link to the Beehive Collective, which is just a fabulous group, you're right, Laura, that does amazing graphic works as a form of building community around all sorts of climate issues. So I'm happy that you shared that in the chat. Thank you very much. And at this point, I'm going to turn the heavy lifting now over to Ashley.
Thank you, Hilary. So just again, if anyone kind of came in a little after my introduction, I am Ashley. I am an MA student at OISE currently. So at this point, I'm going to explain sort of what our idea is this year for the eco art installation. So it was definitely a bit of a challenge. We had a few meetings around this. How are we going to do this when we don't have access to the OISE building? We can't get together, like you saw those amazing examples of previous installations where we were able to get together and work on the art and then install it. So I had to get a little bit more creative this year than usual. So Hilary mentioned earlier the Sustainable Development Goals and how we are inspired obviously for what they stand for and what they mean. And the amazing connection there is right there to a just recovery in this conversation. But we were also inspired graphically. And you'll see in a moment when I explain what our idea is for this year that we definitely took some inspiration from the design of these SDGs. So you can see they're very simple. It's very clean design. You can very easily understand what the message is alongside the text. And so not just in meaning, but also in graphic design, we've been inspired by these SDGs for our eco art installation this year. And if Hilary, if you can move to the next one, I can now explain our idea. So we are focused on raising awareness and encouraging action towards a just recovery. And just the name for this year is Keywords for a Just Recovery. Collaborative art making models, the collective efforts needed to achieve a just recovery. So we're still going to have a collective effort where you will be sending in your submissions, and that collective effort, and you'll sort of see how all those pieces you'll submit will come together, mirrors that collective effort of a just recovery. And this is going to be created by all of you, our OISE and TDSB community members. And this will be installed online in the spring, so you can see it before we are back in the building. And eventually, once we can be back in the building, we will also be installing this in OISE's walking art gallery. So like in those staircases in the future. So you'll also be able to see it there, hopefully sooner rather than later.
And Ashley, I just want to give a little shout out to the small team of graduate students who came together online in the fall to help design this project. So it was it's been a collaborative effort right from the
Definitely. Okay, so these are the instructions for how you will actually design, so kind of like an icon like those SDGs for our installation. So I'm going to go over the instructions, but these also will be on the OISE ESE website. So you'll have a copy of them there. So you're first going to start with determining your idea or ideas that contribute to a just recovery, which we already saw a lot in the chat, a lot of when we were kind of talking about what we would add to those leaves of that artwork of Mona Caron. Lots of ideas. So you can definitely pull from there. And what you will end up doing is you design your icon in a circle. So I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment, but if you can see at the bottom there is this circle that will be on the OISE ESE website for download. And so your icon will fit into that circle. And the inspiration why we chose the circle, where as you saw the SDGs are rectangles, there's a lot of obviously meaning with the circle, especially in terms of the environment. When we think about like things like circular economy or closed loop systems, especially in Indigenous perspectives, the circle has a lot of significance, but also this sort of brushstroke, it's still information, and that's kind of was also meaningful for a just recovery in that this is, we're working towards this. So what you'll do is you can download that circle on the OISE ESE website, and you have two options there. You can either download the PDF and then draw your image, which I'll explain kind of what that'll look like inside the circle, or if you feel more comfortable with the tech, it's also available as a PNG. So this when you open the download, you'll just kind of see a totally blank screen. That's because the circle is black, or just a whole black screen, but it's because there's no background. And then, so if you create your image, you can then just put the PNG on top, and that'll kind of help reduce or help keep kind of a better quality of the image, but both options are available to you if that's a little bit too much tech for some.
I think, you know, as long as you create a
for
circular image, it can be fit into this existing circle we'd like to use.
exactly.
We've purposely chosen this circle. Ashley designed it for us, which was great, because it's really in the process of still forming. It's quite loose in terms of sort of a brush stroke type circle. We like the sort of referencing to some of the calligraphic traditions from countries like Japan and China. But see, the circle is not quite closed yet. And for us, that signals that this notion of contributing to a just recovery is still in formation.
Yes, so then once you have your circle either printed off, or you've maybe drawn a circle that you will then put that image you see at the bottom corner there on top, you're going to draw or paint, design, whatever medium you like best, a black, white, and gray symbol. So there will be no color with this, just because, especially we're getting a lot of submissions. That was one of the challenges. How are we going to do this? And I think it's, when you kind of see our ideas for the installation, it's going to look really fantastic that there's going to be this unity of that they are all within the same color scheme, which in this case will be black, white, and gray. And will also, I think, help have a really great visual impact of just the black and white. And so that will represent one idea that you have for a just recovery inside the circle. And then just a reminder to please create your own image rather than taking one from the internet, just to respect existing copyrights. But we saw so many already in the chat. I don't think that necessarily will be an issue. And I think, I don't know if there's another, yes, right, in the title, we have 1 to 2 keywords that you'll also include in your image. And we just, as a reminder to, of course, use respectful language, since this will eventually be installed online and physically in OISE. So those, so your image, your 1 to 2 keywords in that circle, either within the circle or uploading it to your computer and then putting that PNG of the circle on top.
And I should just flag that our use of the word keywords was very intentional. Those of you who are OISE students know that when you go to do a literature review or a library search, you need to put keywords in that you're searching for. And that typically is the beginning of a knowledge building process. So we're hoping that for many of you, your keywords that you select will actually be the start of your deeper dive into whatever aspect of a just recovery interests you the most. There's a link we're going to give to you a couple of times, and we'll have it on the resource package as well. This is the link to the instructions on the OISE website, and you can refer to them back anytime, and that's where you're also going to download the circle image that Ashley referenced.
So just before I go over these exemplars, I do see a question here from Lauren. I do want to address that. I will explain a little bit further. Asking, I'm assuming our students will be doing this. This is actually going to be open to OISE students and TDSB employees. So this will actually be created by you and not by your students if you have your own class.
But I should point out, Ashley, we have no problem with people taking this idea and replicating it with their own class in their own schools. That would be a fantastic way to spread the message around a just recovery. But we're a little sensitive to numbers. And if we had, you know, even if we had dozens of TDSB teachers sending us our class images, I don't think we could really respond to that number of circles. So we're going to encourage teachers, TDSB employees, and OISE community members to participate in this particular installation, and then again replicate the idea in your own situation as much as you'd like.
Absolutely. And if anyone does end up doing anything inspired from this with their classes, we'd love to also see that. So these are some exemplars that we came up with for keywords for just recovery. So you can see the combination of just a black and white image with just a few keywords. And so some of these were created digitally. So if you have access to creating digital art, but again, these can be done by hand or painted or whatever medium that you've like. So these were just some examples to kind of give you an idea of what we thought these finished images might look like. Just again, like those SDGs, very just simple, black and white, but you can also use that gray for shading if that fits your design.
Now, I should point out that Ashley actually designed hers on her iPad, and the examples that I came up with were hand-drawn using just a Sharpie and a pencil. So you don't need fancy materials to do this. You can do it with quite simple materials. We recognize that everybody is working typically out of their homes these days in education, and that art supply stores are not open. So don't feel like you have to race out to buy anything fancy for this. It can be very, very simple materials.
Yes, I think that was kind of one of our initial ideas, was like, can we just, what does everyone kind of have access to? And Sharpie was the first thing that came to mind, that it would just be such an accessible way to do this. So what you see now is our kind of still rough idea of what this final installation will look like. So hopefully we can get them a little bit closer together in the final installation. But basically, we're going to vary the sizes of your icons, and then they will all come together. We're just re-emphasizing that collective growth and effort towards a just recovery. And again, just to reiterate, like Hilary said, hopefully when people are walking by and they're seeing these keywords, again, to inspire them to look them up in that searchable way, kind of mirroring like what we might be doing all the time with our research. So we're really looking forward to, after getting in all your submissions, what the final product will look like, but this kind of gives you an idea of what to expect.
And just for the record, Ashley's going to be putting this all together for the digital installation online. It will be posted on our ESC website and shared broadly. If you've registered for this webinar and you're with us now, you'll be sent the link to the final installation once it's installed. We will be printing these icons out onto a type of adhesive material we've discovered that's made from 100% recycled plastic. So the impact will be very low in terms of the actual installation when we get that far, whenever the building is open for us to do that.
And I'll just answer, I'm seeing from Kelly how many circles will be in the display. So that is just really depending, I guess, on how many submissions we get. We also do welcome multiple submissions. So if you can't really pin it down to one idea, if there's a few things that are really important to you, feel free to submit more than one. But we, I guess we'll have to see on numbers, but we're hoping that anyone who attends this webinar or watches the recorded version will send us those submissions. So just a few instructions for submission. This was another sort of thing we had to discuss, because if we're getting things sent online, we don't want to lose the quality of your beautiful icons. So the best way to submit your work will be to first scan your artwork. So using a scanner, but I know maybe not all of you, especially if you're working from home now, you might not have access to a scanner. There are actually a lot of scanning apps. So just you can use a phone or an iPad or whatever or a tablet. And it basically, essentially what it does, it takes a photo of your work, but then it sort of produces a scanned like version. And that'll just help really the black and white colors really stand out and be like this high contrast. If you are unable to scan or use a scanning app, that's not a problem. We do welcome a photo. Just when you're taking that photo, make sure that your circle is on a white background. So if it's on a sheet of paper, that might be best. Taken in natural lighting, a cloudy day is actually best. And just making sure there's no shadows or anything like that. And minimum 300 DPI. So that's just the minimum. If your file size is way larger, that's actually better for this, because since this will be submit to us and then eventually printed, there is a lot of potential for loss in quality. So if you can send us the whatever best resolution you can get of your image, will kind of result in these fantastic final installations. And we ask for PNG, JPEG, and PDF format. So just no Word documents or anything like that. So then once you have that image scanned and on your computer, you will email that to oisesc@gmail.com. And you have until April 1st of this year to submit that in. So lots of time, especially if you submit one and you end up having another idea, that gives you time to submit your second or third submission. And we just ask that this is sent through your OISE or TDSB email account. So just make sure you're logged into your OISE or TDSB email account before you send it to send us your submission. And also feel free to email oisesc@gmail.com if you have any questions, especially regarding submission or anything like that, or if you maybe any other questions, I guess, regarding that.
Thank you, Ashley. You did a terrific job. This is the first time we tried a digital installation, so who knows, maybe it'll start a new pattern. You know, we've often done this, this setup where we have multiple people contributing to the installation, but everybody contributes one bit. So like with the birds that's in my virtual background right now, we had people contribute a bird or two or three, depending on what they were comfortable creating. The nice part about this is whether you're part of our OISE community or whether you're part of our TDSB community, this is your way of leaving your mark on the wall, quite literally, and hopefully jumpstart the conversation about a just recovery as part of the work that we do around sustainability and climate action at OISE as well. So we'll thank you in advance for your contributions. There's lots more sites that you can turn to. Both 350.org and the Just Recovery for All site both have arts kits that they can recommend that take different approaches to undertaking this work. The Art for Climate Change site is fantastic. There's a really interesting site called Brandalism, which is about branding ideas rather than items, rather than consumer items. So we'll put together a collection. We'll save the ones that you recommended in the chat, and we'll send all of these out to you in the next week or so, probably just after the long weekend, so that you can pick up where we've left off and hopefully share these ideas and then try some of them out in your own classrooms. Now, I promised, as I was talking about Christy Belcourt and Isaac Murdoch, to put another plug in for our upcoming Ecom conference. This is being done in conjunction with EcoSchools Canada and with the TDSB EcoSchools program, the Natural Curiosity Project at our lab school here at OISE. We are very happy to be bringing Canada's National Conference in Environmental Education to Toronto, and OISE is one of the hosts for that. There is a subsidy for TDSB teachers to attend. Information, if you haven't received that already, will be forthcoming, and you can certainly email Jen Vetter at the TDSB to get a bit more information about the subsidy. And there is also a student rate for OISE students. So we'd love to have you join us to not only hear Christy and Isaac, but also Larissa Crawford, who's coming to talk to us as one of the keynotes, Julian Egelman, and just, I think, Elise, we're over 80 presenters, I think, if I remember correctly. Is that right? Elise is our coordinator for the conference and is putting so much time into this right now. Elise, we thank you in advance for that. Lots of information on the ESE website at OISE, as well as on the TDSB's website about the conference. You can also go to ecoschools.ca to get information about the conference too. So we'd love to have you. A bunch of you in the chat are saying that you're already registered, so we're thrilled to hear that. That's fantastic news. I also point out that we are launching our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. This is very exciting for us at OISE. We're the first faculty vet in the country to have our very own Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. This is completely inspired by our work with the TDSB EcoSchools program, and very much jumping off on all of the amazing work they've done over the years in terms of bringing sustainability and climate action to the TDSB. So we're so appreciative of their inspiration, and we're very happy to be sharing this. This webinar will be led by Dean Glenn Jones, and a number of us will be involved on Thursday, February 25th. So we really encourage you to join us, please, for this launch. And then we have more workshops coming up in March, and of course the conference in April. You can access any of our previous webinars that you'd like on the link down below, and we'll make sure that link is sent out to you as part of the resource list that we'll send out in about a week's time.